welcome to this May morning. It is a good day to be together, if not in person, at least virtually, and hope is here. This service is brought to you by Reverend Kevin, Vic Allen, and myself from the church's sanctuary. Again, welcome whether you are a longtime attendee to this church or this is your first time. We have a few weekly announcements, as always. The first one, if you are able, please sign into the chat box to the right of your screen. This will let us know who is joining us. And if you don't want to sign in, that's okay, and we welcome you as well. We will be having joys, sorrows, and concerns today, and if you didn't email them to the worship team, now is the time to put them into the chat box so a candle can be lit for you. Please indicate if it is a sorrow, concern, or a joy. It has also been noted that new people have been joining us for our live Sunday service. If you are new and would like to get on our email newsletter, please call the church admin office and leave a message with your email address. If you would like to talk to someone about the church, again, please contact our office. We are so glad you are joining us. While we no longer are having an offertory time during the service, it is still important nonetheless. We also would gratefully receive any other donations to support us. Just go to our website to click on the Give button. Thank you for your support. We will now move into the sacred time of worship. To breathe is to take in air, to take oxygen into the lungs and expel it. So inhale and exhale. Breath allows us to rest and recover. When we hold our breaths, we deny our body a needed element. We tire and lose energy. Breathing freely provides relief from anxiety, tension, and pressure. So, breathe easily, inhale and exhale as I ring the peace bowl 3 times. Let go of that anxiety, tension, and pressure. We will now begin our service with our prelude. Our church covenant was decided upon by a group of members from this congregation. Our covenant, along with our 7 Unitarian Universalist principles, is our guide to how our congregation will relate to each other and the world. Even though we cannot be together physically, I believe it is still important that we read our covenant together. As I read our church covenant for us all, please recite it from home with me. Love is the spirit of this community and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. We will now be lighting our chalice. If you have a candle or chalice available, please light yours with us. Our chalice lighting is by Kate McPhee. Light is returning. A gnarled tree is in sunlight. Around us, light is returning. It rekindles the spirit of life in the skeleton of trees. It brings forth new shoots from the soil. It wakes us from our winter slumber and invites us to see what lies beyond. We light this chalice in the spirit of our Earth's awakening and to reaffirm our commitment to the value of our home.
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning is the poem When I Am Among the Trees by Mary Oliver. When I am among the trees, especially the willows and the honey locust, equally the beech, the oaks, and the pines, they give off such hints of gladness. I would almost say that they save me, and daily I am so distant from the hope of myself, in which I have goodness and discernment, and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and bow often. Around me the trees stir in their leaves and call out, "Stay a while." The light flows from their branches, and they call again. It's simple, they say, and you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light, and to shine. I invite you to join in our opening hymn, number 44, We Sing of Golden Mornings.
We sing of golden mornings, we sing of sparkling seas, of prairies, valleys, mountains, and stately forest trees. We sing of flashing sunshine and life bestowing rain, of birds among the branches and springtime come again. We sing the heart courageous, the youthful eager mind. We sing of hopes undaunted, of friendly ways and kind. We sing of roses waiting beneath the deep piled snows. We sing the earth's great splendor, whose beauty round us glows.
Today's Time for All Ages is on the topic of crown shyness in trees from National Geographic, read by Elizabeth Coyote, Director of Lifespan Faith Development, written by Catherine J. Wu. On a warm day in March 1982, biologist Jack Putz strayed into a knot of black mangrove trees seeking relief from the afternoon heat. Drowsy from his midday meal and hours of field work in Costa Rica's Guanacaste National Park, Jack decided to lie down for a short siesta. As he gazed skyward, the wind stirred the tops of the mangroves above him, causing the limbs of neighboring trees to claw at each other and snap off some of their outermost leaves and branches. Jack noticed that this reciprocal pruning had left tracks of empty space running throughout the canopy. This network of treetop chasms, called crown shyness, has been documented in forests around the world. From the mangroves of Costa Rica to the towering Borneo camphor trees of Malaysia, gaps in the greenery abound, but scientists still don't fully understand why the tops of trees so often refuse to touch. Beneath the mangroves 40 years ago, teetering on the verge of a post-lunch snooze, Jack reasoned that trees need personal space too, a critical step toward unraveling the roots of the branch's bashful behavior. I often make great discoveries at nap time, Jack says. Today, a growing body of work continues to support the early observations of Jack and his colleagues. Wind, it seems, plays a crucial role in helping many trees maintain their distance. The boundaries carved by bouts between branches may improve the plant's access to resources such as light. Gaps in the treetops might even curb the spread of leaf-munching insects, parasitic vines, or infectious disease. In some ways, crown shyness is the arboreal version of social distancing, says Meg Lohman, a forest canopy biologist and director of the Tree Foundation. The minute you start keeping plants from physically touching each other, you can increase productivity, she says. That's the beauty of isolation. The tree is really safeguarding its own health. Though descriptions of crown shyness have appeared in scientific literature since the 1920s, several decades passed before researchers started systematically digging into the phenomenon's cause. Some scientists initially pursued a hypothesis that trees were simply failing to fill the spaces between their canopies due to a lack of light, a crucial resource for photosynthesis, where their foliage overlapped. But Jack's team published research in 1984 showing that in some cases, crown shyness may simply be the product of a battle between wind-blown trees, each racing to sprout new branches and parry strikes from their neighbors. In their research, the more mangroves swayed in the wind, the more widely their canopies were spaced from those of their neighbors. Some of the first results supporting this so-called abrasion hypothesis to explain the treetop patterns. About 2 decades later, a team led by Mark Rudnicki, a biologist at Michigan Technological University, measured the forces jostling lodgepole pine trees in Alberta, Canada. Windy forests full of tall, spindly trunks of similar height were especially prone to crown shyness, they found. And when Rudnicki and his team used nylon ropes to prevent neighboring pines from colliding, the plants interlocked their canopies, filling in the gaps between adjacent crowns. Other scientists have found clues that several paths to crown shyness likely exist, and some are perhaps less combative than these windy tussles. For instance, Mark says that some trees may have learned to stop growing at their tips entirely, wising up to the fact that any new foliage will be stripped away. Trees could thus avoid unnecessary damage, says Inez Ibanez, a forest ecologist at the University of Michigan. Growing new tissue is very costly for plants. It's like the trees being preemptive. Let's not grow here because it's not worth it. Some trees may be capable of taking this prudence a step further by using a specialized sensory system to detect chemicals emanating from nearby plants. There's a growing body of literature around plant cognizance, says Marlaise Duguid, a forester and horticulturist at Yale University. Data on chemical communication in woody plants is sparse, but if trees can sense each other, they may be able to halt canopy growth before they're forced to tussle. Regardless of how crown shyness occurs, the separation likely comes with benefits. Leaves are like the tree's most expensive diamonds. You want them to protect them at all costs, Meg says. If a whole bunch get bumped off, that's a terrible disaster for the tree. Sparser foliage could also help sunlight reach forest floors, nurturing the ground-dwelling plants and animals that in turn support arboreal life. Jack thinks the gaps may even help trees avoid invasive woody vines called lianas, which are common in tropical and temperate forests around the world, or buffer plants against disease-causing microbes and flightless insects that use canopies as conduits. Some germs and bugs could still theoretically make the hop when trees box in the breeze. Many of these possible advantages, however, have yet to be conclusively linked to crown shyness. Forest canopies, the tops of some of the world's tallest plants, aren't easy to study, says Meg, a self-described arbonaut, and one of the few scientists who has made a career studying canopies. Examining the tops of trees requires quite a bit of climbing, balance, and bravery. The limiting factor is our inability to deal with gravity to get to those places, she says. Still, ignoring the canopy of a tree is like trying to understand the human body from only the waist down, Meg says. The crowns of trees teem with life, and much of this biodiversity may still be undiscovered, especially in the tropics. Luckily, crown shyness isn't something you have to get on a plane to see, Jack says. It's happening all around, and what an enriching thing for people to look up and see. The end.
For years, the sharing of joys, concerns, and sorrows has been our enduring ritual. And I really miss not doing it in person because it's so valuable to this congregation. But it is time for our congregation where each of us has an opportunity to share major events in our lives so we can all be uplifted by this Unitarian Universalist community. As I, or Vic, read the joys, concerns, or sorrows that were emailed to us or put into the chat box, Reverend Kevin will light a candle. And I actually have two joys. I'm lighting a candle of joy because in the next 2 weeks I will get to see my two sons. My youngest I'll see this next week, and my oldest, who I haven't seen in 3 years, I will see on May 31st. Another joy, even more joyful, is that Tom and I are going to be grandparents for the first time. A concern from Reverend Kevin is for the escalating violence between Israelis and Palestinians, and especially for the children and ordinary people in the West Bank, who typically bear the brunt of this violence. Reverend Kevin has another joy for the 60th anniversary of the Unitarian Universalist Association, which was formed on May 15, 1961, with the merger of the American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church of America. And I believe we have one more from Victoria McDonald that Vic will share.
Victoria this morning shares a concern. She says, my community in Ketchikan is on high alert after a wrestling tournament. I also send healing thoughts to other countries and communities who continue to suffer from COVID-19.
Do we have any others?
Nope.
Okay. So, but we do light an additional candle for all those joys, concerns, and sorrows we hold in our hearts and are unable to share today. Stay healthy and strong, members and friends. Our UU community lifts up its love for each and every one of you.
I have two short readings this morning. The first is an excerpt from the book The Song of Trees, Stories from Nature's Great Connectors by David George Haskell. For people who have lived within the Amazonian forest network for hundreds and sometimes thousands of years, the Waorani, the Shuar, the Quichua, and others, the forest is not an assemblage of biological and physical others. Although these cultures are linguistically and historically divergent, and their belief systems are as varied as those over any continent, Amazonian peoples appear to agree on one thing. What Western science calls a forested ecosystem composed of objects is instead a place where spirits, dreams, and waking reality merge. The forest, including its human inhabitants, is thus unified. But this is not a union of what were separate parts. We exist from the start in spiritual relationship. Spirits are not otherworldly ghosts from a distant heaven or hell, but are the very nature of the forest, earthed and grounded, connecting soil and imagination. Amazonian spiritualities grow from generations of pragmatic empiricism. My second reading is an excerpt from the book Forest Bathing, The Japanese Art and Science of Shinrin-yoku by Dr. Ching Lee. We all know how good being in nature can make us feel. We have known it for millennia. The sounds of the forest, the scent of the trees, the sunlight playing through the leaves, the fresh, clean air. These things give us a sense of comfort. They ease our stress and worry, help us to relax and to think more clearly. Being in nature can restore our mood, give us back our energy and vitality, refresh and rejuvenate us. We know this deep in our bones. It is like an intuition or an instinct, a feeling that is sometimes hard to describe. In Japanese, we have a word for those feelings that are too deep for words, yugen. Yugen gives us a profound sense of the beauty and mystery of the universe. It is about this world, but suggests something beyond it. The playwright Zeami Motokiyo described it as the subtle shadows of bamboo on bamboo, the the feeling you get when you watch the sun sink behind a flower-clad hill, or when you wander in a huge forest without thought of return.
We know it in the mountain, reaching up to the sky. We know it in the ocean, swimming with life. We know it in the forest, rooted deep, growing high. We know it in the buzzing of the honeybee. But do we know it in the mystery of you and me? It's who we are, long before we're given names. Who we are, dust. We know it in the mountain, reaching up to the sky. We know it in the ocean, swimming with life. We know it in the forest, rooted deep, growing high. We know it in the buzzing of the honeybee. But do we know it in the mystery of you and me? It's who we are, long before we're given names. Who we are, dust and dirt and human frames. Who we are, just a spark of nature's flames. We don't live on the earth after all. We are living earth. We know it in the glowing of the burning trees. We know it in the crashing waves of the rising seas. We know it in the fading of the birds' melodies. We know it in the bone-dry ridge where the river used to be. But do we know it in the emptiness within you and me? It's who we are, long before we're given names. Who we are, dust and dirt and human frames. Who we are, just a spark of nature's flames. We don't live on the earth after all. We are living earth. If we really knew who we belong to, what are the loads we wouldn't have to hold on to? If we really knew who we belong to, what would our hearts feel nature's flames. We don't live on the earth after all. We are living earth.
I have felt a strong connection with trees as long as I can remember. Growing up in the foothills of North Georgia, where the Cumberland Plateau meets the Southern Appalachians, surrounded by a transitioning pine forest with a smattering of cedars and hardwoods, the forest was always present. To this day, I find I am most at home, most comfortable and content in the company of trees in a forest. In fact, though I appreciate the beauty of wide open spaces like the Snake River Plain, it has been a challenge for me to adjust to the sparsity of trees here. But fortunately, we are close enough to plenty of forested public lands when I really feel the need for the solace of the forest. Whether I'm happy or sad or just being outside among the trees touches my soul in a way that is undeniable but hard to explain. Sometimes walking even just a few yards into the woods, finding a place to sit and remaining there for a time, is all that I need. And throughout my life, the forest was waiting for me when I was confronted with life's most difficult moments. As Mary Oliver's words this morning so wonderfully attest, there is something salvific about being among the trees that reminds us, despite the darkness that may seem overwhelming, to go easy, to be filled with light, and to shine. No matter the season, trees provide beauty and contrast in the landscape, from the greening of new growth and the blossoms of flowering trees in the spring, to the rich, dark green canopies providing shade in the summer, to the explosion of color in the fall when the chlorophyll in the leaves of deciduous trees breaks down, transforming them from green into brilliant shades of red, yellow, and orange, and to the dark presence of evergreens in winter when the world around is fallow and gray. It is understandable that hordes of people are drawn to the back roads of New England and a few other places to witness the annual display of the so-called leaf season, even when conditions are not ideal for maximum color. I'll always remember the fall of 1994 when my wife and I were fortunate enough to enjoy near-peak colors for almost 2 months, thanks to the timing of a paddling trip to the Boundary Waters in Minnesota, followed by a backpacking trip in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, and then later a backpacking trip in the Great Smoky Mountains of North Carolina and Tennessee. Following the seasonal transition from the North Country to the Southern Appalachians was a truly magical experience, and it was the trees that made it so. Trees naturally fascinate us because of their size, which is sometimes quite enormous, and because of their longevity. Human beings can seem small and ephemeral in comparison. I have not yet seen the giant sequoias and redwoods in person that can grow to over 300 feet in height and 80 feet in circumference. But I have seen some massive old-growth tulip poplars and hemlocks in the Southern Appalachians that are truly inspiring, topping out at nearly 100 feet and 30 feet in circumference. And as for longevity, many trees routinely live for several hundred years, and some even live for thousands of years. In May of 2019, for example, researchers discovered an ancient stand of bald cypress trees in the wetlands along the Black River in North Carolina. And one of these trees has been confirmed to be 2,626 years old. This means that the tree began life as a seedling in the year 605 BCE. For some historical context, 605 BCE, it was the year that the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II defeated the Egyptians in the Battle of Carchemish and then laid siege to Jerusalem in the Kingdom of Judah. He soon initiated the first deportations of Jewish nobility, beginning the period of Jewish history known as the Babylonian captivity. 605 BC was also about a century before the golden age of Greece and the birth of Siddhartha Gautama, who became known as the Buddha. This is a very old tree, to say the least, but it is hardly the oldest, nor is it unique. There is a yew tree in Wales that is thought to be about 4,000 years old, and the oldest individual tree on Earth discovered so far is a Great Basin bristlecone pine in the White Mountains of California, which is believed to be 5,064 years old. That means it began life in 3043 BCE, about the time construction began on Stonehenge. And if you look beyond the ancient individuals and include so-called clonal trees, which are clusters of generations of genetically identical trees connected by a common root system, the timelines are even more staggering. One example is the Pando, or trembling giant, clonal colony of quaking aspens in central Utah. It currently consists of more than 47,000 individual trees, covering 106 acres and weighing approximately 13 million pounds. It is estimated to be around 80,000 years old, making it a strong candidate for both the largest and oldest living organism on Earth. We can only imagine what living hundreds or even thousands of years would be like. As the title of my sermon suggests, can you imagine the tales a 5,000-year-old tree could tell if they could share their story, not to mention one that is 80,000 years old? Science has revealed how incredibly important forests are for sustaining biodiversity, and the complex ecology of old-growth forest is remarkable. It takes millennia for these forests to reach the stable web of intricate, interdependent relationships between plants and animals we see today. Even second-growth forests that have the appearance of recovery after a couple of centuries are impoverished in biodiversity compared to their old-growth counterparts. Some species are completely dependent on the presence of the oldest trees, and when too many of these trees disappear for several decades or centuries, they never recover. In Europe, for example, where most of the old-growth forests have long since disappeared, scientists have identified dozens of insect species in peat deposits that exist elsewhere in the world but are locally extinct. We are also learning that what we can see in the forest is only part of the story. We are discovering that trees and other plants communicate through chemical and electrical signals in ways we never expected. Trees send messages to each other, even to other species, through airborne chemicals, and below ground through root tips and symbiotic fungal networks. They demonstrate other remarkable behaviors as well. In some tree species, a so-called mother tree will nourish its offspring that are overshadowed by its own canopy by providing sugars and other nutrients to their roots until the mother tree eventually dies and the younger trees can flourish. Who knows what we will discover next? With increasing signs of plant intelligence, maybe someday we might actually learn to communicate with trees. And they can tell us their tales after all. Perhaps they could speak of all the times that life was a struggle, times of drought, fires, and severe storms, reminding us to remain steadfast, and that we too can endure the hard times. Or maybe they would talk about the tremendous beauty they have witnessed year after year in the cycles of nature, birth and new growth, flowering forth in the spring and resting in the cold of winter. One thing they would probably tell us is that we need to spend more time in the woods. Study after study has demonstrated the psychological and other health benefits of time spent in nature, and time spent in forest seems to be especially beneficial. The best research on this subject is taking place in Japan and Finland. And what they're finding is that evergreen forests in particular have special health benefits because the trees produce compounds called phytoncides. These volatile organic compounds are primarily produced to protect the trees themselves, but they also seem to boost human immune systems and provide other benefits, such as lowering blood pressure, reducing stress and anxiety, and accelerating recovery from surgery. Doctors in Japan and a few other places are even starting to prescribe walks in the forests as therapy for their patients. In Japan, the practice is known as Shinrin-yoku, which translates to forest bathing in English. The idea of Shinrin-yoku is to leisurely stroll through the forest or simply sit in one spot and absorb the sights, smells, and other sensations. These are not hikes per se, but since the practitioner may only walk a short distance during a session, the purpose is to simply be in the forest and absorb its benefits. Sessions are often concluded by sipping a tea made from needles and leaves gathered during the session in the forest. Special forest bathing paths are even being created throughout Japan for this practice, and it is starting to gain interest in other parts of the world. Certified guides are available to assist people in getting started with this practice, and there's a growing network of certified guides in North America. My wife and I attended a forest bathing session in Massachusetts a few years ago with a guide, and it was a very pleasant experience. It is a practice available to all ages and abilities, so you might want to try it sometime. But we hardly need new scientific studies to feel a deep connection to trees. Trees have been known for their beneficial properties since ancient times, and they are also prominent in the spiritual traditions and creation myths of almost every culture in human history. With their tall trunks, their crowns and branches high overhead, and their roots probing deep into the earth, they have often been imagined as the link between the ordinary world, the world above, and the world below. For the Norse peoples, the great cosmic tree was Yggdrasil, the giant ash tree that connected the 9 worlds and whose inevitable demise signaled the arrival of Ragnarok, the end and rebirth of the universe. A similar world tree can be seen in the mythology of the Maya, Aztec, and Olmec peoples in Mesoamerica. For them, it was a type of ceiba or kapok tree that can grow to great heights with enormous buttressed roots above ground. Among the Abrahamic faiths, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil are famous in the story of Adam and Eve, although the version found in the Quran is a little different. The Quranic version of the story includes one tree called Shajarat al-Khulud, or the tree of immortality, but the rest of the story is essentially the same. In Proverbs, wisdom itself is described as a tree of life to those who lay hold of her. And in Psalms and among some of the Hebrew prophets, the cedars of Lebanon are mentioned as a symbol of might, righteousness, and human pride. In fact, the mighty cedar of Lebanon was so well known in the Jewish tradition that Jesus confounded his audience in the parable of the mustard seed by comparing the lowly weed to the cedar's grandeur as a surprising metaphor for the kingdom of God, saying, "When it grows, it is greater than the herbs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and lodge in its branches." His audience would have been expecting to hear the kingdom of God compared to the cedar of Lebanon, but how is it like a common weed? Special trees, groves, and even specific tree species have been held to be sacred by cultures throughout the world, from the sacred oak groves of Europe to a wide variety of trees venerated by Native American tribes, to the Bodhi tree, the fig tree under which, according to tradition, the Buddha sat until he attained enlightenment. Incidentally, that type of fig tree now has the wonderful scientific name Ficus religiosa. The human imagination has produced an incredibly rich lore about trees, often endowing them with human traits and magical powers, especially for healing. I believe the reason trees are so prominent in our spiritual traditions points to a deep connection that we have felt all along. Something about them evokes that ineffable and profound sense of the beauty and mystery of the universe. It is no surprise, then, that we often memorialize our loved ones by planting trees in their memory. In my daughter's Rachel memory, we have planted a maple tree at her high school, and we have donated to several organizations to have hundreds of trees planted for conservation in her memory. We have also donated to preserve an acre of rainforest and an acre of forest in one of the Audubon wildlife refuges in Rhode Island. And I'm thankful that she was honored with elm trees planted at the First Universalist Parish in Chester, Vermont. Every month, at least 50 new trees are planted in her memory. Rachel grew up camping in the woods and singing my friend Walking Jim Stoltz's song, "If I Were a Tree," whose lyrics inspired this sermon. And she aspired to study forest ecology. I can think of no greater tribute than to plant trees so that the birds of the air come and lodge in their branches, and that all the creatures of the forest may find food and shelter. And when the day comes when my wife and I too have passed from this world, we plan to have all of our ashes interred together in a so-called green burial plot in a forest. I don't know what mysteries await beyond this world, but resting among the trees of the forest seems like a good idea no matter what comes next. With the weather warming and leaves filling in, I hope my talk today makes you want to get outside and appreciate the beauty and wonder of the trees. When you're out walking in the woods, really think about the trees and maybe even speak to them or give them a hug. We share a deep connection that can stir the soul. I invite you to join in our closing hymn, number 207, "Earth Was Given as a Garden."
Earth was given as a garden, cradle for humanity, tree of life and tree of knowledge, placed for our discovery. Here was home for all your creatures, born of land and sky and sea, all created in your image, all to live in harmony. Show to us again the garden where all life flows fresh and free. Gently guide your sons and daughters into full maturity. Teach us how to trust each other, how to use for good our power, how to touch the earth with reverence. Then once more we lead and flower. Bless the earth and all your children. One creation make us whole, interwoven, all connected, planet-wide and inmost soul. Holy Mother, life bestowing, did our waste and warfare cease? Fill us all with grace o'erflowing. Teach us how to live in peace.
Our closing words are the poem "I Go Among Trees" by Wendell Berry. I go among trees and sit still, and my stirring becomes quiet around me, like circles on water. My tasks lie in their places where I left them, asleep like cattle. Then what is afraid of me comes and lives a while in my sight. What it fears, it leaves in me, leaves me, and the fear of me leaves it. It sings and I hear its song. Then what I am afraid of comes. I live for a while in its sight. What I fear in it leaves it, and the fear of it leaves me. It sings and I hear its song. After days of labor, mute in my consternations, I hear my song at last, and I sing it. As we sing, the day turns, the trees move.
We will now extinguish our chalice with the following words. Please join me. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Please be sure to join us for our coffee hour after the postlude.